Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to talk about 10 books that I have recently read. I will have content warnings in the description box down below for you if that's something you think you might need. But without further ado, let's get right down to the 10 books. We are going to start off nice and gothic with Graveyard Shift by M.L. Rio. This is her new dark academia novella, so it's very nice and short. And in this one you are following 5 unlikely almost friends, you can call them, and they end up going to a particular graveyard late at night to take a smoke break because there is nowhere else on campus that you are allowed to smoke. When they are there smoking together one evening, they see a man bury something mysterious in the ground and try and cover it up, and then they kind of end up solving the mystery of what that man was doing in the middle of a graveyard and what he was burying and why. And that is what this novella follows. I really enjoyed this, and I thought it was done very well. For the most part, it was an unlikely group of people that come together to figure out what is happening here, and I really liked the people that came together to figure out what was happening here. It was a very unique take on what people would often say is a friendship dynamic, because they're not actually friends yet, they're not quite there, they're just people who know each other because they smoke in the same place. And I liked their relationship. I liked how they were friends with some people in the group but also disliked some more than others and had romantic history with some. And I really liked how this one did the passing of the baton very well. So you'd be in one person's point of view and they would solve one element to the mystery, but then they would come up against something that was not their expertise or that they knew somebody else would have the answer to, and so then we would switch into the next person's point of view as that character kind of hands off the information for the next person to be able to solve the next bit. And I thought that was a very clever way of doing the narration, and it was so smooth and seamless, but at the same time I could see that M.L. Rio had done that with intention, and I really liked that. I think it was a good way of piecing together the narrative, connecting all of their relationships, but also showing how they were all very individual and could bring something different to the table in solving this mystery. I also really liked that this was kind of a take on dark academia that we don't get to see that often. We are not following students in this one. We are following the person who works at the bar that is on campus. We're following the tutor who is tired and overworked. We're following the person who's the receptionist in one of the buildings. So it's all these different people who fall into dark academia for whatever reason, or who are around the dark academia lifestyle every single day but who are not the students themselves. And I think that was a bit of a refreshing take on the genre, especially as most of them are struggling or are burnt out or are having a very hard time of it, and you get to discover why. And it's kind of disenfranchising this idea of dark academia being this idolized and romantic thing, when actually there's a lot of struggles for the people who are around and in that environment on an everyday basis who aren't students as well. A lot of this has to do with insomnia and sleeplessness. I don't want to get too much into the plot because I don't want to give anything away, but I really liked, as an insomniac myself, how it tied in the themes of insomnia and sleeplessness and what that can drive you to. I think that was really relatable, and on that front I was a very satisfied reader. The only thing that I would say about this is that I wish it had been longer, and I'm not avoiding giving it 5 stars just because it's a novella and it shouldn't have been, but mostly because it shouldn't have been structurally, because of the fact that this mystery gets unraveled so very quickly and you need to kind of be told the answer of the mystery, just because of the fact that there's not enough page time for them to be able to figure everything out bit by little bit. And I think the outcome of this mystery being solved was rushed through, when I would have liked to see a bit more of the emotional effects and resounding outcome of this mystery being brought to light, which would have been nice to see, but of course because it's a novella we just didn't have time to see that much. So yeah, these are my thoughts on Graveyard Shift. A really good book. I really enjoyed it. I just want it to be a little bit longer, and I don't often think that about the novellas I read. I'm usually quite happy with their length. But now I'm also going to talk to you about Model Home by River Solomon, which I gave 5 stars and instantly became a new favourite. This is River Solomon's take on the horror gothic genre. So think of it as a gothic, one of those slow moving, very creepy, slowly insidious books. And in this one we're following these three siblings. They grew up in this model home inside a closed off gated environment. At this home they believe it is haunted, they believe not great things happen there, and as soon as they become of age all of them flee the nest and move out and go somewhere else. But they are called back to this model home because their parents, who continue to live there, are both discovered outside dead. Now this comes with a lot of content warnings, one of which is quite serious, so I'm going to leave these content warnings down below as I said, and the very first content warning is going to be one that's quite predominant in this book. But I really liked this, I loved it, and I think it was very clever. You've got to be patient. That is the essential part of reading this book. Don't read it if you're looking for something fast-paced. This is for you to take your time with. This is for you to soak in the rich atmosphere that Rivers Solomon builds and creates in this. It's for you to think about whether the horror in this is very real or whether the horror is something metaphorical, whether the horror is racism or whether the horror is something supernatural, and it pulls you between those entities, so you're trying to discern what is the true horror here, and then at the end it hits you with it. While this is called model home, for a large part of this story, but not all of it, the model home is something that is very metaphorical and it's symbolic of something, of a lot of some things, and that all comes together very well at the end. But not only for the horror elements was this good, not only for the message that you can take away from it or the reflections on its themes that you can take away from it, but also because I really loved the sibling dynamic that we get to see here. It's two sisters and one sibling, and I really appreciated how it showed how you can love your siblings to pieces. You can love them from the bottom to the top of your heart, but you can still feel that competitive nature, and you can still feel that protective, nobody messes with my sister vibes. All of that siblinghood is encapsulated very well in this particular book. You get to see someone who is an adult, who is a parent, but who is also very much a child at heart, and who is struggling with reconciling the fact that they've got trauma that they have to deal with while they've got to parent somebody else, a whole other human being. And I appreciated getting to see that dynamic as well. It's not one I can personally relate to because I'm not a parent, but I think it worked wonders for this story in particular. The writing style is fantastic. You're following a black, disabled, fat, non-binary main character, and I think all of that representation is done to perfection because this is Rivers Solomon. They don't play around, they write really good books. They make me think of this as a Toni Morrison if Toni Morrison wrote a gothic novel. It was just that fantastic, and I don't know what more I can say. Please read this. It's out in the US now and it's out in the UK in February 2025. Worth your time. Now I would like to talk to you about a classic that I finished reading, and that was A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I buddy read this with Abby from Abbey of Pelennor, and it is one of Charles Dickens' very well known novels. I would say it's one of the classics with the most famous first line, which is, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times," and it's about two cities essentially, Paris and England, and it's about the French Revolution, so it's set during that time period. And it's also about a prisoner who has been imprisoned for a very long time and is freed from prison and is dealing with the trauma of having come out of that environment and is trying to live his life with his daughter. So you've got a lot of things at play here. There's the French Revolution, there's the prisoner storyline, but all of it comes together very well at the end. And ultimately what I think this book really focuses on is that disparity between the wealthy and the rich, and the misdeeds that are done to both the wealthy and the rich, and the misdeeds that are done especially to those who are not better off, to the poor and the impoverished, at the hands of the wealthy who are not sharing their wealth with other people. And so it really is, that's something that Dickens really comments on a lot, the working class, the riches and capitalism, and that is completely at home in this book with the French Revolution, with that setting being the core element to it. But it also kind of unpicks that with a bit more of a complicated lens of what if you've taken a step away from your wealth? Are you still to blame for the crimes of your family? All the crimes that are committed by the money that you've now inherited? Like, what happens next? And so that is also featured heavily in the story. But at its core, the element that made me really love this is the character work. The characterization in this is superb, and I really felt for the doctor, the prisoner, and the friends group that they built around him, but also to his daughter and the way that the daughter is kind of growing up and what the daughter does for his father. There is clearly a caring for a family member relationship happening in this book, and I think people don't talk about that enough. I feel like people also don't talk enough about how this is a very good depiction of mental health in a classic that I've never seen before, and about how the people you are around can really impact how well you can handle the trials and tribulations that come with mental illness or going through a difficult mental health period. But of course it's also like a very tragic tale set around the French Revolution, and we cannot ignore that fact. There are multiple ways and reasons for why this ending could be seen as bittersweet, could be seen as emotional and sad to some, and I was on the camp that found it to be very emotional and very sad and bittersweet, but it was absolutely heartbreaking in a beautiful way. And so the reading experience of this, seeing it all come together in the end, all of these varying plot lines, all of these themes that Dickens had dipped into, and all of these characters that I had grown to love over the course of the story, seeing it all come together in the way and with the ending that it did really pulled on my heartstrings, and I just sat there and I thought, this is absolutely phenomenal. And so I think rereading this, having known how it ends, is going to be a really fun task for me, for future me at some point. And in the end I gave this book 5 stars and I absolutely loved it. This edition, I got this in a secondhand shop and it comes with illustrations, and that embellished my reading experience all the more. I think the first line of this is iconic, and ever since reading that first line I should have known that I was going to find the whole book to be iconic. It has now become my favourite Dickens. Up next we're switching to an adult contemporary novel, and that is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. I would actually call this an adult romance one. So this one is about a woman who is trapped on the subway, and she is kind of lost in time and stuck in time, so she cannot come off of this subway. And it's about the girl who meets her on the subway and kind of falls for her and therefore wants to help get her off the subway. There's also a stuck in time element, as in she's from the past but now she's here in the present day, and I just thought this was okay. And I really had a bit of a journey reading this one because I really like the concept. I really love a time loop concept. It fascinates me to no end. It's like how I'm really into time travel stories, and seeing this be something quite different where she's stuck in this time loop but she's also stuck in time because of what's happened to her, I was just like, this is fascinating. I would love to delve into this more, but the book doesn't really delve into it that much. This is very much more about their relationship and building it up and how they fall in love, and as they fall in love, our character Jane, the love interest, starts to remember more and more about her past life. The main character doesn't do as much sleuthing as I thought the main character would. It's more so how can we prompt memories and work with those memories to then be able to figure out how to get her off the Q train. I also found this book overly long. Like, it's nice, there's some really nice secondary characters that are fully fleshed out. All of the secondary cast are queer, so there's a lot of queer joy and queer love and coming into your queerness in this, because our main character is like, knows that they're queer from the get-go and from the beginning, but has never had a girlfriend and has never had such a like strong group of queer friends around them. So she's starting to slowly come into her queerness, which is just really joyful to see happen and really fun to read about. But it does drag. It drags for a really long time. This book didn't need to be this long, and I don't usually notice when chapters are very, very long, but in this one I was reading and I was like, when is this chapter going to end? It just feels never ending. So I felt like it lost some of the happiness and joy that I got from reading this just because it took a long time to finish. I also was not a big fan of the things that they do on the train. I'm not a PDA person, and I just draw a line at some things being done on a grotty subway. If the subway is anything like the tube, it's dirty, it's public, you just don't want to be doing some of the things that they're doing on it, because this is an adult romance book. There are some steamy scenes. The steamy scenes don't go into too much detail. They're fairly on the tame end for steamy scenes, but they're doing this stuff in a public train, and it just gives me the ick. I was also a bit disappointed in the end. I think the way this all came together, I was like, really? You could have done a bit more with that. So I wanted a bit more from the time loop, but I did enjoy the characters and I did enjoy the story. I just don't think it's going to be a very memorable one for me. I've read only this author's young adult with like his Shah Wheeler. Will I read Red, White and Royal Blue? to be determined. I also read Trumpet by Jackie Kay. Now this is a black literary fiction book, and it's about a woman who is married to a trumpet player who is very, very famous, and then that trumpet player dies. And what is then brought to light after his death is that he is trans, and the only person who knew that he was trans was the wife. And it's about grief, really. It's a large look at grief. It's a large look about what it means to grieve when you're in a relationship with someone who's queer, what it means to grieve when that person was not necessarily out and now she's been bombarded by the fame and everybody wanting answers from her. And also it goes really extensively into the son's perspective as well, and how he feels about the fact that he discovers that his father is trans posthumously, and it feels like he didn't really know his father because this big secret was kept from him his whole life. And is he owed that knowledge? Is he owed that secret as someone who's a family member? That is one of the questions that this book answers. So I appreciated reading this one. I'm someone who really likes books on grief. I've mentioned that quite a few times before. I read a lot of non-fiction around it and a lot of fiction around it, and I just hadn't seen a portrayal of grief that was like this, that took into account the fame, the media, the queerness and the race of the person who is grieving. And it's a really beautiful look at their relationship. It goes back to when they first meet and how he ended up coming out to the mum, and I really like that it goes into lots of different people's perspective. So it's not just the mum and the son, it goes into the person who diagnoses the body after they're dead and says whether the person who has died is male or female. That's something that has to be determined. It goes to the person who handles the paperwork. Like, it goes into all these different perspectives, and so you see everybody's different take, everybody's different opinion, but ultimately I just felt like the only one that mattered was the mum and the son. And so I loved that by seeing other people's perspectives, it enhanced my experience of reading the mums and sons' point of view all the more. A really beautiful, sad book that's written very well. I had a really good reading stint when I read these 10 books. So I read Tweet Cute by Emma Lord, and oh my goodness, this shocked me. It became 5 stars and it became a new favourite. Now this story is wonderfully layered, and that's one of the things that I admire the most about it. So you're following these 2 teens, and they are both children to people who own food shops. So I think her mum owns a fast food chain and his parents own a deli, and what happens is they are at school and they kind of have a little bit of a disagreement with each other. They don't know each other very well, but they both share the same swimming pool at school for their trainings, and they have a bit of competition in the timetable. But then what happens is the fast food chain apparently steals the recipe from the deli, and so they tweet about the fact that their recipe has been stolen. But the tweet kind of sparks a Twitter war between the 2 companies, and what nobody knows is that it's the teenagers who are actually both running the Twitters for these family businesses. And so it's them not knowing that they are part of a Twitter war where they're tweeting against each other, but they're also competing a little bit for space in the swimming pool. And there's another layer where there's this app where you can talk to people anonymously, and they're kind of talking to each other anonymously, and they don't know that it's the other person. So there are 3 layers to how they are competing against each other, and this book balances all of them very, very well. I was impressed by the fact that Twitter is not a thing anymore. Twitter is called X, and yet this didn't feel outdated. This felt even more topical for how toxic the X space has become. So I appreciated getting to see the layers of them having this competition with each other on multiple platforms, on multiple layers and fronts, without knowing exactly that they were doing that. I love seeing their relationship develop. I am an adult reader reading young adult, and teenagers make silly decisions, and oftentimes I'm just like, oh my goodness, what are these teenagers doing? But I keep reading because that is part of the genre.
It's a genre.
However, when I read this one, I was actually honestly so impressed with these teenagers. I would have done exactly the things that they do throughout all of the book. Any choice that they made, I was like, sis or bro, I understand why you're making that choice. I would have done the same thing. And so these characters show incredible emotional maturity for their age, while still feeling like realistic teenagers, while still having different elements of conflicts that they have to solve for this book to work on multiple fronts. And I appreciated that this had such healthy communication in a young adult novel, and yet we still had a plot with its tensions, with its downfalls, where they needed to apologize, where things went wrong, even though I agreed with all the choices that the characters were making. Absolutely loved it. I really loved the parental representation in this one. I will admit, her parents maybe less so, but for his parents I really liked how they were parenting their kids and the things that they said and the one-to-ones and discussions they had. I really liked all of that, and I thought it was very, very well done. When I was reading this book, I could just tell that Emma Lord was someone who had siblings, because the sibling dynamics in this were too good to be true. Too good to be true. I loved the sibling relationship. She has a sister and they've got a conflict going on, and he has an identical twin brother, and while they don't have an outward conflict going on, inwardly they have some element of conflict with each other. And I really like that we got two separate sibling stories, and both those stories kind of needed to be resolved within their own right, but were given the page time that they needed to a certain extent. It didn't feel like the sibling elements overrode the main story, but it didn't feel like they were swept away and brushed under the rug either. We got to see siblings being messy, we got to see parents being messy, we got to see the romantic relationship having its tangles and difficulties, and it still also had time to show a friendship building, and I really like that it just juggled and balanced all of that impeccably. I haven't even touched on how this one tackles toxic school culture as well as being really cute and heartwarming. Everything that I would want in a young adult contemporary, this book gave to me. We're just going to slide ourselves further and further away from the gaping sunlight thing that's happening over there. But next I've got to talk to you about a middle grade, and that is Mayowa and the Sea of Words by Chinundu Onuzo, and this is the first book that I'm reading by this author, and I'm sad to say I really didn't like this middle grade book, and I don't think it's a very good one. I wouldn't recommend it. So this one is about Mayowa. She is a young girl, she is black, she has a blind mother and a white father, and she has the ability to jump on books, and when she jumps on books she can channel the emotions of that book to various people around her. There are rules and regulations to this that she should be following, and then there's a large conflict in this book which has a lot to do about a vote in Parliament, and that vote in Parliament is going to determine whether refugees are welcome in the UK or not. This book, I appreciate what the author is trying to do. I appreciate that we've got black main character who's mixed race parentage. I appreciate that we've got a blind mother. I think it's really nice that we get to see a black and disabled parental figure who is not the main character in a middle grade book. And I like the concept of book jumping. I like creativity behind the ability to jump on a book and to channel those emotions, but everything else just really, I really struggled with it. The writing style in this one is quite simplified. I can show you kind of what level of middle grade it is. I think the size of font on a book shows you the middle grade level quite well, and actually there's also really nice illustrations in here which is worth me showing you, because I really liked the fact that there were illustrations that looked so good, and those are illustrated by, oh that's a shame, it doesn't say who the illustrator is on the cover. It was really poorly done and executed. Large part of the execution problem was the fact that they really tried to simplify the wording in this, and because they tried to simplify the wording, it kind of simplified the plot and simplified the themes in a way where it actually makes everything a little bit murky. And my biggest advocacy for middle grade is that children are smart enough to get it. Children are smart enough to deal with complicated and emotional subjects. And I appreciate that it isn't vying away from the political situation with the vote, but it becomes very murky in what it's trying to stand for, because Mayowa is told not to channel to sway people's emotions, and that people deserve autonomy, and so you're only supposed to channel when it's like a very clear-cut reason why you should do that. You shouldn't channel in Parliament to change people's opinions and make them vote one way or the other, because it should be them who chooses that and decides that for themselves, which I completely agree with. So Mayowa accepts this, and then the plot just unravels in a way where her and her grandfather are constantly channeling to change and impact people's decisions, and I was confused because I was just like, you literally told us that that is not what you should channel for, and it's dangerous to channel that way. and then that's what the whole book proceeds to do. What kind of message is that supposed to give to children who are reading this? So I found that to be very, very confusing. The reason why the villain is also very brushed under the rug and told very quickly, and so it seems like because lineage is taken from the villain, that is why they are the villain, but that doesn't give us motivations for the co-villain, and that doesn't really give us motivations as to why he is so horrible at all. Like, I don't think it was properly explained. So I didn't like how the villain seemed to be a villain by chance, seemed to be a very cartoonish villain. The disability representation, I can't speak on it because I'm not blind, but I think sometimes by trying to oversimplify the wording, they kind of used wording that was worse than if they'd used more words to explain the situation in a bit more detail. And so there were some moments where I was like, I'm not saying the representation is bad, but I wouldn't really like it to be worded that way if I'm giving it to a child. And the ending was just like, at the end, I don't know, I just felt like it wasn't a good middle grade. I've read much better middle grade than this. We are going to change up the tone completely here because we're going to talk about a book I absolutely loved, and that was Food for the Dead by Charlotte Shevchenko Knight. Now this is by a Ukrainian British poet, and I give it 5 stars, and I absolutely loved it. It is largely about Ukraine and weaponized famine. So I know what's happening in Ukraine now. I know about the Ukrainian-Russian conflict that's ongoing, and I know about the period of Stalinism and also weaponized famine that Stalin used and wielded against Ukrainian people at the time. I did not know about the other famines that Ukraine has had, and I didn't know about the other significant moments in Ukrainian history, and by reading this book, it doesn't like explain them to you because it is a poetry collection. There's not that many words, there's not that much space to do it, but it gives you just enough info that you understand the situation, and that prompted me actually to go off and do my own research, and so I learned a lot more about Ukrainian history by reading this book, which I really, really appreciated. I absolutely loved Charlotte's writing style with her poetry. She writes in a very staticky way. The syntax of the wordings, and syntax of wording just means the rhythm of the lines, the rhythm of the sentences, and the way that she chose those words made it feel very staticky and buzzy, very energetic in its wording, which was almost ironic based on the fact that it was a lot about famine and starvation, and so the people that were in these poems, the personas that we were following, didn't have that much energy, didn't have that much vitality to what they were doing. So I really liked that writing style combined with the subject matter, and then again also the enjambment, the way that she put the words on the page, the way she chose the line breaks for things to lay out. It also just felt very reminiscent of what it was talking about, and so I could see that the poet had put a lot of thought into which word was going where and what it looked like on the page, and where she made us stop reading and start a new line to be very effective in the collection that this is. And it's a painful collection to read. A lot of it is about starving and the choices that you make when you are starving. She describes the hunger, the constant craving for food and water that you feel so very well. I've never felt that level of hunger, and yet I was emphasizing, I was emoting while reading this. And then also things that I never thought about that come hand in hand with starving, which is when you are a mother and you are all starving, who do you feed? Do you feed your children? If you're a pregnant mother, do you feed yourself because you've got a baby inside you? Like, the choices that you have to make when you're living in a society that is starving are shocking. And reading this collection, I was very much hit with the reality of what it means to live while in a famine, or what it means to live while starving, what it means to try and work in that environment, what it means to be a family member, a friend, a person with natural body cravings in that environment. And so the grieving that happens, the constant grieving, the constant fear, the constant uncertainty, all of that is poured and channeled and sharpened into this poetry collection, and she knocked it out of the park. I think this is again one of the best poetry collections I've read this year. I've read so many good ones, but this one really just gave me all of those emotions, all of those feelings, and that's what a poetry collection should do. It should make you feel things. And what an art, what a masterpiece this collection is. I also read Northern Soul by Earle. Now this is a very short, very early reads young adult book, and I really, really liked it. I thought it was very, very good. This one is about a boy in his class, and he gets a crush on a girl, and he's struggling. He doesn't know how to act. He's got braces now, his body is changing, doesn't know what to do to get this girl. So he goes home and he hears his dad playing Otis Redding music, and he thinks that's some of the most romantic music I've ever heard. oh my gosh, Otis Redding, if only he was alive, he would know what to do. And then the ghost of Otis Redding appears to him, and this ghost of Otis Redding is going to give him advice to help him win the girl that he has a crush on in school. But maybe this advice doesn't quite work out the way that it should. Now, what I liked about this one is a lot of things. I thought it was funny. The humour was the perfect humour for like young children, like preteen age. That preteen age for boys, that kind of humor is in this very well. And I'm not saying toilet humor, fart joke humor. I'm saying just like silly situational humor where you cringe at what your parents are doing. All of that is really well depicted in this. Seeing Otis Redding just be a silly ghost who's giving bad advice was hilarious to me. It was never disrespectful to girls, which I really respect, while showing that this boy didn't know anything. And it was showing some of the, you know, not toxic masculinity, but some of the bad ideas that men have that shouldn't be ideas. And it was just showing teenagers like, that is a bad idea, just talk to her. That is a bad idea, just show that you like her, show that you care about her, show that you want to support her through whatever she's doing. And so I liked that this managed to be funny and jokey, but not making girls or men being terrible the butt end of the joke, doing it in a healthy way. And I liked where this book ended. I think where it ended was suitable for the story, but also continued to bring that entertainment level. Really funny, really silly, very, very quick read. I just sat down and read this all in one go. So if you've got a boy who is really struggling with reading, this is also a good one for them to be able to read because it's short. The font is dyslexia friendly font, I've been reassured, so yeah. And last but not least, I'm going to talk about a picture book. This picture book here, it's called Two People Can. It's by Blessing Musariri and Maisie, Paradise-Shearring. Now, this is a picture book about this mum and this little boy, and the dad is out of the picture. We're never told if the dad has left the mum, we're never told if the dad has passed away, but for whatever reason, dad is not coming back. And this young boy doesn't quite understand. He misses his dad, he wants his dad, and he starts acting out, he starts having tantrums, and he starts being mean to his mum. And it's about him slowly discovering that two people can go on by themselves. You don't have to be a set of three to be able to continue moving forwards in life. But also, what I really liked about this one as well is that you see this young boy learn not to only consider his own emotions. So he is grieving, he is sad about the situation, he doesn't fully understand everything, but in the midst of having a tantrum and being mean to his mum, he realizes that, oh, actually this is affecting my mum too. Actually my mum is having emotions here. Actually my mum is a person. And you get to see him make that realization and try and do better by his mum, while also still being able to express his own emotions. And I think that's just such an important message for children to learn, that it's okay to have emotions that aren't good, that it's okay to feel upset, but you can also take other people into consideration at the same time, and maybe together you can heal and move forwards. So the artwork in this is quite picture book friendly. It does the trick. It's not like the best artwork I've ever seen, but I like these colours, I like the style, I like it for picture books, and it's got a decent amount of words on the page for what it is. But yeah, a good picture book. This is a solid one. I would recommend it to parents, teachers and guardians, and people who are giving gifts to young kids. I think it's a good story to read. The lighting is really not liking me here, so I am going to leave it there. Please let me know in the comment section down below, what was the last book that you read? What did you think of it? Have you read any of the books shown here? Is there something that's been added to your TBR? Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't you forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. You know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!